Snow churned in angry swirls over the narrow mountain pass, the wind howling like some ancient spirit awakened from its sleep. Caleb Morgan leaned into the gale, his scarf drawn tight against his face, the worn handle of his axe slung across his back. He had ventured out before first light to check the snare lines and maybe track a deer, but now he was racing dusk, and the storm was winning. He was halfway back to his remote cabin when he spotted something odd in the snow by the base of a pine tree, a shape that didn't belong to the forest or the storm. At first he thought it might be a downed elk, but as he drew closer, his boot crunched against something soft. Not fur, cloth. It was a woman. She was curled in on herself, half buried in snow, her long black hair frozen stiff and matted with ice. Her arms were wrapped around a small bundle, barely visible under layers of thin, tattered blankets. A child. Caleb could hear the faintest rasp of breath. He knelt fast, brushing snow from the woman's face. Her lips were cracked and purple, her skin pale beneath the warmth of her copper hue. She stirred weakly, opened one eye, then passed out. Around her, huddled in a pitiful clutch, were 4 more children. None older than 10. Bare feet, frostbitten fingers, hollow cheeks. The youngest was barely more than a toddler, clutching a frozen corncob doll. One child coughed once, then went still again. Caleb didn't pause to think. He stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around the woman and the baby. He scooped up the little ones, one by one, placing them on the sled he'd been dragging for firewood. The smallest he tucked against his chest under his vest, sharing what warmth he could. The wind sliced at his face as he pulled the sled over the ridge and down toward his cabin, each step a battle. Behind him, the pass was already disappearing under fresh snow, erasing the tracks as if no one had ever been there. By the time he kicked open his cabin door, his beard was a mask of ice and his arms shook with fatigue. But he moved quickly. He threw logs onto the hearth, stoked the fire to a roar, and set blankets by the stove. He boiled water, crushed herbs, and ladled what stew he had left into tin bowls. The children lay silent at first, unsure, but the heat began to draw small signs of life, coughs, shifting limbs, and finally the soft sound of a child crying. Caleb turned toward it. The oldest, a boy with high cheekbones and dark, wary eyes, was sitting up now, holding his younger sister's hand, both shaking. The woman still hadn't stirred. Caleb wrapped her in another blanket, checked her pulse, then dipped a cloth in warm water and brushed the frost from her face. "Come on," he whispered. "You made it this far. Don't quit now." She didn't respond. Caleb sat beside the fire, surrounded by strangers who shouldn't have survived the night. He had no idea where they'd come from, or why they were here, but it didn't matter. Night fell hard in the mountains, the storm outside battering the log walls of the cabin like a beast trying to claw its way in. Inside, the air shimmered with the heat from the fire, thick with the smell of smoke, pine sap, and stew. The children were asleep, curled like pups under every blanket Caleb owned, their breathing slow and shallow but steady. The oldest boy, maybe 10 or 11, still sat upright, keeping watch. His eyes followed Caleb with quiet suspicion, but he didn't move. Caleb stirred the stew again, letting it simmer low over the coals. There wasn't much left. He hadn't been planning on feeding 6, but it would do for now. He ladled some into a wooden bowl and set it beside the sleeping woman. She hadn't moved in over an hour, but the color had begun to return to her cheeks. Her chest rose and fell, with the rhythm of someone clinging to the edges of life. He sat nearby, resting his sore arms on his knees, staring into the fire. The metal on the wall glinted in the orange light, a tarnished brass star pinned to a square of blue velvet, now gray with dust. He hadn't looked at it in years. He wanted to forget what it meant. A sound broke the quiet. A rustle of fabric, a sharp intake of breath. He turned. The woman was awake. Her eyes opened slowly, dark and glassy with confusion. Her gaze darted around the room, at the fire, the sleeping children, the log beams overhead, then locked onto Caleb. She didn't move, didn't speak. Her fingers curled reflexively, reaching for something that wasn't there. "It's all right," Caleb said, his voice low, even. "You're safe." She said nothing, just stared. Then, after a long pause, she sat up with great effort, her body shaking. She looked toward the children, lips parting when she counted them, one by one. All 5, all breathing. Her shoulders sagged in relief. The oldest boy rose then and crossed the room without a word, kneeling beside her. He placed her hand over his own chest. Caleb saw her eyes close for a brief moment. The boy said something in Apache, soft, rhythmic. She answered weakly. "I didn't know what to call you," Caleb said, breaking the silence again. "Do you speak any English?" She looked at him for a long time, as if weighing the danger in every word. Finally, she nodded once. "Some. I'm Caleb." Her eyes narrowed. Why? He knew what she meant. Why help? Why take them in? Caleb leaned back, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Because you were dying. That's all." The fire popped. Outside, the wind was howling again. I am Sani, she said finally, voice raspy. We ran, from soldiers. Militia. They came. 2 days ago. Maybe 3. She paused, lips trembling. My husband. He stayed. Held them off. Told us go. So we go. But. The cold. Caleb nodded. He didn't press her. He'd seen enough death in his life to know how loss carved silence into people. One of the younger children stirred and began to cry. Caleb moved instinctively to help, but Sani raised a hand, gentle but firm. She rocked the child in her lap, murmuring something in her language, rubbing warmth into tiny limbs. I got some more stew, Caleb said, rising slowly. It's not much, but it'll help. She hesitated, then nodded. He filled a second bowl and handed it to her. As she took it, their fingers brushed briefly. Hers were still ice cold, but steadier now. She nodded again, this time with something like gratitude. Not spoken, but understood. Caleb returned to his chair, watching the snow pile high against the cabin windows. They'd made it through one night. But the mountains had long memories. And so did men. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving behind a white silence so complete it felt sacred. The sky above the trees was a hard, pale blue, the kind that promised no warmth despite its beauty. Caleb stepped out of the cabin, breath fogging the air, axe slung over his shoulder, intent on splitting wood before the day got away from him. The world was hushed. He paused on the porch, scanning the horizon, and that's when he saw it, thin trails of smoke rising in the distance beyond the ridge. Not a hunting fire, not a solitary traveler. This was something else. His stomach tightened. He went back inside, his boots leaving wet prints across the floorboards. Sani was feeding the smallest child, gently spooning stew into the girl's mouth while murmuring in her native tongue. The children looked better this morning, no longer blue-lipped and limp, but still weak, still fragile. Get the little ones back under the blankets, Caleb said flatly. Now. Sani looked up sharply, instantly alert. She didn't ask questions. She moved. By the time the first riders came into view, Caleb was already on the porch again, coat on, rifle across his lap. There were 12 of them, men on horseback, rifles slung or resting casually across their saddles. They weren't subtle. Their eyes were hard. Their boots were clean. Their coats were too new for trappers. At the head rode Elias Rowe, a man Caleb hadn't seen in years but had never forgotten. Tall, heavy-set, with a limp in his left leg from a barbed wire accident, or maybe it was a shootout. He had a face that looked carved from rawhide and a voice that could make a dog whimper. Well, look at this, Elias said as he drew his horse to a stop at the base of the porch. Didn't figure you for the charity type, Morgan. Didn't figure you'd ride this far unless you were looking for trouble, Caleb answered calmly. Elias smirked. We saw tracks in the snow yesterday. Small ones, kids. Thought we'd find some coyotes, maybe a few stragglers from that raid down by Red Creek. Caleb didn't answer. So imagine my surprise, Elias went on, scanning the cabin, when word gets around you're playing nursemaid to an Apache woman and her brood. There was a rustle inside the cabin. One of the children had peeked through the curtain. Elias noticed. So did the others. A few tightened their grips on their rifles. Not your concern, Caleb said. The hell it ain't, Elias snapped. You know damn well what happened to the McGraw place. What those people did, what they always do. Caleb's voice didn't rise. They didn't do anything. They were running from the same men who burned down that village. Probably the same ones you drink with every week. That's not the point, Elias said. You're harboring hostiles. Doesn't matter if they got babies or not. Doesn't matter if they're hurt or cold. They're the enemy. Caleb stood slowly, rifle still resting in his hands, but now his knuckles were white. You remember Cold River, he said quietly. Elias's jaw twitched. The men behind him shifted uneasily. Yeah, Caleb continued. I do. I remember seeing boys, our boys, dying with their guts spilled in creek beds. And not one of them ever looked like these children. You talkin' their side now, Elias said. His voice had a dangerous edge. You goin' red on us, Morgan. I'm taking the side of a human being freezing to death with a baby in her arms, Caleb said. Call it whatever you want. The wind picked up again, rattling the snow in the trees. For a long moment, no one moved. Elias leaned forward in his saddle. You hand him over, he said, or we take him. Caleb raised the rifle just enough to show he meant it. His face was stone. You come through that door, he said, you'd best be ready to die. Another long silence. One of the younger men on horseback, barely more than a boy, looked away, uncertain. Another lowered his rifle, if only slightly. Elias scowled, but he saw the shift. He spat into the snow. You always were a stubborn son of a bitch, he muttered. Then, to the others, we're done here. He turned his horse. The others followed, some slow, some quick, not a word among them. Caleb waited until the sound of hooves had vanished into the trees. Then he went back inside, locking the door behind him. The cabin was quiet again, but the air inside felt heavier than before, like the silence after thunder. Caleb stood just inside the door, rifle still in his hand, staring at it for a long moment before leaning it gently against the wall. His breath escaped in a slow, controlled exhale. Outside, the last of the riders were disappearing into the trees, their tracks already half covered by fresh flurries falling from the branches above. Sandy sat near the fire, watching him. Her expression was unreadable, part fear, part disbelief, part something softer, harder to name. The children huddled close around her, still, but their wide eyes had seen everything. Caleb walked to the table and poured himself a cup of lukewarm coffee. His hands weren't shaking, but there was a tightness in his shoulders that hadn't been there an hour ago. He sipped, grimaced at the bitterness, then poured the rest into a pot on the stove to warm again. Sandy spoke first. They will come back. He looked at her, met her eyes. Maybe. She nodded once, slow and solemn. More angry, likely. She glanced toward the children, then back at him. You did not have to stop them. Caleb didn't answer right away. He pulled out the old chair beside the hearth and sat, stretching his legs toward the fire. The flames crackled quietly, throwing shifting light across his face. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and even. There was a time I would have let them. Or worse. Sandy tilted her head slightly, listening. I rode with the 3rd Missouri during the war, he said. Then came out west and joined up with a cavalry outfit out of Fort Craig. Spent 3 years chasing Apache through canyons and mountains I didn't understand. Did things I don't talk about. He looked into the fire. Then one day, I came across a burnt wagon. Settlers, whole family dead. Man, woman, 2 little girls. Scalpings, burn marks, no tracks to follow, just ashes and flies. And I remember thinking, this is why we fight. This is justice. Sandy's gaze didn't leave him. But I kept thinking about it. Why that wagon was there. What they were doing. Whether they were warned. Whether someone else had already lost their land so they could pass through. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. That doubt never left me. It grew. And it stayed. Sandy said nothing. She didn't need to. I didn't save you because I'm good, Caleb said. I saved you because it was the only thing that felt right in a world where most things don't. The toddler stirred in her lap, letting out a small whimper. She soothed the child with a hand against his back, her voice soft again. You saved us, she said. That is enough. He stared into the fire again, the glow reflecting in his tired eyes. You can't stay here, he said after a moment. They'll be back, and next time, they'll bring more guns. I'll hold them off if I have to, but it won't end well. Not for me, not for you. Sandy nodded. She knew it already. I know a path through the northern pass, Caleb continued. Old Miner's Trail. Cuts along the canyon rim. If you travel light, you can make it through in 2 days. There's a hidden stream past Red Elk Bluff. Nobody goes there this time of year. I'll draw a map. Sandy looked down at her children. They are too weak. I'll go with you partway. Help carry what you can't. We'll make it. There was no emotion in his voice, no self-pity. Just quiet resolve, like a man who'd already made peace with what came next. Outside, the snow fell lightly, softening the blood that had been spilled in this land long before either of them was born. Caleb stood and began packing what little food and gear he had left. Sandy joined him, still silent, her movements precise, focused. The children watched them, sensing that something had shifted, not just outside, but within the man who had opened his door to them. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows over the snow-covered earth, Caleb paused and looked out the window. The trail ahead would be cold, harsh, and unforgiving.